Well, it's the time that for this morning session as well that we'd like to bring you to come with us for the next topics. Yes, of course, we are now in a dynamic world, but how to build a strong network among entrepreneurs and startups all together. There will be your very interesting session that we'd like to deliver to everyone. It's a time for the Global Entrepreneurship Network experience, how to leverage the power of global networks. That we are honored from all the panelists. Our speaker will share their insight with us today. Can we allow me to introduce our speaker who will join with us for the Startup Thailand 2017 Scale Up Asia today. We are honored from Ms. Ellen Glow, Global Advisory Board Member, co-founder, Gen UK, Mr. Yatin Thakur, Managing Director, Gen India founder, and co-working Startup India. And the moderator, Dr. Susan Ahmed, founder and CEO of Venture Hive Metric. Everyone, please give a big round of applause in welcoming everyone on the stage.
Hi, welcome to what is promising to be one of the most fun panels of the day. I'm Susan Mott, and you have no idea how lucky you are. Because today with me, we have people who are not only incredible business people, ecosystem builders, community leaders, but people who have taken up the banner of the Gen Network in their respective countries to tell you about how that connectivity, their visions for an internationally connected world then translate into ecosystem development in their countries. So Elaine Gold, Yatin Thakur from India are going to each go through. I really want to start out by you guys just explaining the incredible past you've had and the experiences you bring to the panel today. Then we can start going into why Gen and telling the story. So Elaine, why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, hi everyone. So my journey and my experience with Gen started probably about 6 years ago. At that time I was living and working in Qatar. I was Director of Organization and Strategy for a social enterprise that was focusing on youth entrepreneurship across the region. And as you can imagine, across the MENA region, an 18-year-old's needs in Libya or Tunisia or Yemen is very different from an 18-year-old in Qatar. So in Qatar, we had the challenge of developing from scratch, really, an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we couldn't do that really on our own. As Mike and others have said, it's a longer-term system. So I knew about GEW. I plugged into GEW. We became GEW host organizer. And I'm going to stop there because that was the start.
Okay, but this is the problem. When you find people who are world-class, they're usually very humble, and you don't get to know how amazing they are. So I'll give the background on the development of GEW to GEN in a couple of minutes, but give them background on the amazing life you had before even Qatar, the business experience you have, because I think that tells the story of the caliber of people that then can create a Gen country and the why it's so valuable to be part of this network.
Okay.
Don't be humble. Brag for 1 minute, I'm asking.
I'm British, we don't brag, you know, we don't do this sort of thing. Okay, so before Qatar, I worked with a number of different companies as a management consultant focusing on personal individual change. Myself and my late husband started a business together. We focused on it for a few years. We saw it successfully developing. We got sidetracked and the whole thing failed. We completely crashed and burnt.
And that's the best, to be able to then help entrepreneurs understand and navigate.
Yeah, learn a lot.
You learn who you are after you fail sometimes. Thank you, Elaine. Yatin, my buddy, please give them your actual background and what you've been doing leading up to then starting Gen.
All right. Thank you so much, Susan. And hi, guys. My name is Yatin Thakur. I'm from New Delhi, India. My journey started when I was 16. Just like you, Susan. You started probably at 15, still getting there.
We're not competing, though. It's okay.
When I started at 16, my problem was I was coming from a country which has the second largest population in the world. It's very competitive. There's a lot of focus given on academics. But if you do not perform well, what do? That was my problem. I was always one of those person who couldn't study well, or even if I would study, I could never score well. And if I wasn't scoring well, doors for me were always closed, be it in the best engineering colleges or be it in the best management institutions. I was like, damn, nothing is going to happen for me. I'm not going to get a job, so what do? So when I was in 11th grade in school, I decided to launch my own venture because I was very clear I'm not going to get a job. And if I'm not getting a job, I got to create my own job. And at that point of time, I started working. I started following my passion. I launched my first venture, which was in telecom space back in 2003, and started exploring different ideas. By the time I turned 21, which was 5 years into entrepreneurship, I realized how people were so scared to take risks in the country, how they were always scared to fail, how they were not experimental because they thought, what if we fail? What if we die? What if something doesn't work out, right? With me, in those 5 years, I saw 2 failed ventures, but I was always in a position to fall down and again get up because that's all I knew in my life. So that's what I was doing. I built several ventures. Finally, after failing in 2 ventures, I was able to sell 2 companies. And that's when I realized, okay, entrepreneurship is actually very easy. You know, it's about solving a problem. It's about doing something very simple. It's about enjoying the journey. So that's when I decided to start spreading this message, start talking about it more, and start inspiring more people to start up. At that time, people were like always stopping me that don't do this, or we cannot do it because entrepreneurship requires money, entrepreneurship requires a lot of risk-taking appetite, and I was like, nothing like that. It just requires an idea.
To me, the quote of the day is entrepreneurship is easy, because I have never heard anyone say that before, so yay. I'm glad you think it is. That's amazing. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes on why we're here. And Elaine was kind enough to be super organized and make sure we have this amazing slide behind us. I'm sure all of you have heard of Global Entrepreneurship Week. It's run in more than 150 countries. It's the 3rd week of November every year since 2008. That's a celebration of entrepreneurship. And it usually is the binding fabric of government, schools, universities, public sector, and startups coming together to tell a different story of what entrepreneurship is. So a few years ago, the group that runs Global Entrepreneurship Week started something called Global Entrepreneurship Network, which was bringing together all of these incredible people who are the regional leaders of these activities to start going deeper into making sure that there was shared best practices, policy, research, so that everyone from every region had other reference points to look to for, does this work in this kind of ecosystem at this level? How do we then make the argument for our government or organization to try something else? And really share what works and didn't work in a very disciplined way to then create the research that helped drives many emerging markets and developed markets to make better decisions around building startups. So Elaine brought this awesome chart, which is their official chart. It includes stuff like Creative Business Cup, but when you start seeing the understanding of best practices in investment, VC, policy, all these different pieces coming together, that's really at the core. So I'm excited to have Elaine and Yatin explain exactly what's been happening as they launched Gen UK, Gen India, and what that process was, and how important that network was, and that incredible knowledge bank of both people and policy that was able to help drive what you guys are doing to change the lives of tens and then hundreds of thousands of people in your countries. Elaine?
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to Qatar because I think we have more experience there. I personally have more experience there of developing the ecosystem. And one of the things, as an example of what you've just been saying, Susan, from GW, one of the things I'm most proud of is, although Qatar is a very small country, and really one city, it has a huge number of different players in the ecosystem. We did a mapping of the ecosystem, and somebody turned and looked at it and said, there's more support organizations here than there are entrepreneurs. And it was really like that there. But a lot of them didn't talk together. So during GW, we set up a small group of key senior players in the government and in a number of the incubators and accelerators and other organizations to actually get together and close doors to talk about the difficulties, the challenges. There were entrepreneurs in there as well. And so the entrepreneurs could speak about the barriers and the impediments to their success to the policymakers. And we started the first year, and it grew, and it developed, and they wanted to meet together in between GW, which is a bit mirrors how Gen came about. And then as Gen developed, we really reached out and became part of, particularly the Global Entrepreneurship Research Network, which was really invaluable for us as an organization and Qatar as a country as it developed.
Yatin, I mean, what you have been doing in Startup India has been legendary. Every time we get together for our annual meetings, getting the updates on what's been happening has been just so incredible. So can you give people a little bit of the history of how that started as Gen, and then what kind of programs and goals you've had in creating it?
Sure. So I'll go back to my involvement with the Gen network. It goes back to 2013 when we all were in Malaysia for Global Entrepreneurship Summit in 2013, 4 years back, yeah. So at that point of time, there were all these startup countries which were coming together. I think you must have all heard about Startup Chile being one of the accelerator initiatives of government of Chile to promote entrepreneurship in their regions, or Startup Canada, or Startup Brazil, or Startup UK, Startup Britain, for that matter. So, at that point of time, there were about 30 countries, and they were all talking about how they are driving entrepreneurship in their countries. There were private bodies and there were government bodies all sitting together. I was coincidentally, or rather incidentally, I just happened to be there, and I saw there was no one else from India talking about entrepreneurship. So I went to Jonathan Oatman, and I was like, Jonathan, where's Startup India? He said, there's no Startup India. I was like, what are you saying? I went back home, searched online, what are we doing on entrepreneurship, and figured out there was nothing happening. So I quickly registered the domain name, started an organization called Startup India, which sort of became a movement to promote entrepreneurship in the country. Before that, for about 2 years, I was running Startup Weekends, and I was promoting entrepreneurship in India. Now, how did Gen come into place, and how did things fall into play? So throughout this journey from 2011 until 2014, while I was involved with Startup Nations, as well as Startup Weekend, we started realizing, like for us as a country, we have got about 700 people who are below the age of 35. And again, another 500 million of those are below the age of 25. So we have a very large young workforce which doesn't have tangible jobs. Most of them are doing duplicate work just because the country wants to be employed. And that's where we thought, what exactly can we do as a nation so that at least our people are doing something and they are not getting into any criminal activities, or they don't sit idle. And that's when we realized if we really want to take people to the next level, if we want to give them exposure, we got to get them exposed to the global environment, because India as a country cannot create 700 million jobs. So how do we do that? And that's where this whole network really started making sense, where we said, okay, there are about 160 countries in this network. Every country requires some skill set. Every country is looking for someone to solve some problem. How about we start connecting them all together? And as part of that, I think all of the different pieces of this universe started making sense. So when you talk about creating a global environment, you have to figure out from where will the money come in. You got to figure out how will the regulatory framework work. How do you migrate people from one country to another? How do you make a country more entrepreneurship friendly? How do you motivate people to start pumping in money? How do you celebrate what is happening in a country and expose it to rest of the world? So that's where I feel for us, setting up Gen made sense. And we started figuring out that it's one small, tiny pin which sort of connects the whole world together.
I'm so thankful for the background, because I think that sets a really exciting piece of why we're here, because Gen Thailand is starting under the incredible leadership of our dear friend Steve. And when I think about how I got started with Global Entrepreneurship Week, because the Kauffman Foundation decided they were going to do this big international thing, and they were begging universities to get involved. And next thing we know, there starts to be this trusted group of people building these programs, very much at first focused on building out the skill sets and the support in the local economy, right? It's increasing the talent and the opportunities for your locals. But when it came to the next level, where we started having GECs, Global Entrepreneurship Congresses, and the Gen Network, it was so outward facing and bringing people in and telling a different story to the rest of the world around the incredible assets and strengths of the country, but also the weaknesses, so we could all get better together. And I think what's so exciting about being here for Startup Thailand and Scale Up Asia is that Thailand is in such an incredible position to be able to be a leader for all of Southeast Asia. And I think the Gen Network piece is going to be so important for that because of the convening power. In fact, I don't know how many of you guys know, the next GEC Plus, which are the very focused programs that are done throughout the year, 3 or 4 times hosted at different countries. Steve is actually hosting it here as Gen Thailand in September. Is it the 21st? And this is going to be one of those opportunities where you have the caliber of people like David and Yatin and Elaine, but from all of the other Asian regions coming together to do a big announcement, which I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about yet. But this is really the power of the Gen Network. So I want to come back to you guys as far as, what did you learn through Gen, or what has been helpful as far as helping the government and policymakers? And think of this as advice to the Thailand government and the ministries who are, I mean, I can't believe the amount of support the ministries already have for startups, for innovation, digital economy. So they're working their butts off to do everything world class. Yeah. But what specific advice can you share with them, either, you know, applied things or just philosophically, to be able to get the most out of this incredible Gen relationship Steve is bringing?
A quick one from me. It touches on something both you, Susan, and Mike said earlier. Mike talked about going around talking to governments and how much you're inundated with the new thing, the new shiny. And I think if you are in a decision-making role, that's a huge temptation, and it's very, very confusing. And you said about Gen, it's a trusted network. And for me, that's the great strength. And that's one of the things that I've learned, and in my role as a global ambassador, as I go back to talk to other Gen countries, I do find I have to remind people that they are a member of this most amazing network. And I can be asked, you know, Elaine, can you put me in touch with this? Can you put me in touch with that? And I'm saying, but you have access. You have access. You're part of this trusted network. Use it. Use it. And give to it, too. It's not just about what you can take. It's what you can give to that network.
That's excellent. What else?
I think for me, the biggest learning was starting from my second Startup Nations meetup, which was in Seoul, Korea, where we had Doug Rand from the White House, the guy who actually worked hard to make sure crowdfunding becomes legal in the US, and how that had a major impact in solving the problem of seed capital, to finding about what countries like Estonia have done to create such a streamlined environment for starting up ventures in Estonia or in Netherlands, how the Prime Minister and the President of those countries have been involved. So, you don't get this information so easily. Our countries are launching startup initiatives. I think this morning Steve was mentioning Thailand is launching Startup Visa. But how do you implement Startup Visa? What all is required in it? How do you streamline the policy and processes around it? Is something which is to learn from this group. So as a group, we have been talking about a lot such things. How do you create a more inclusive environment? How do you create a single access pass where if you are an entrepreneur, you actually really don't require a visa. You can be certified and you can walk into X amount of countries and start doing business over there. To setting up your local offices, to streamlining processes for incorporating companies. There's so much to learn for the government from this forum, wherein now all different government departments, all different ministries, all different ministers have been participating in our roundtables, in our conferences, to share their ideas and their concerns. And they get that tangible advice probably every 2 months, 3 months out of this group, and they are able to implement things much faster.
I think you both touched upon a couple of really key pieces there, because a lot of times we get very excited about the idea of things, but all the value is in the execution. And so the details of what are imparted when you're not just listening to a talk, but you have access to that person. And when you're part of the network, when you invite them to come to your country and share their experience with the ministers, with the policymakers, they're excited to do it because we're also committed to a global support system. I think that that's really, really key. Yeah. That trusted piece you mentioned, I can't stress that enough. I mean, when Steve talks to us and says, hey, I want you to come and talk, we're like, when are we supposed to be there? And then we're like saluting him and we show up. Because we've all been so committed to building our own things, but only through leveraging the global platform we've all been so fortunate to be part of, do we get to keep learning. I mean, whether you're an entrepreneur or an ecosystem developer, the issue is, how do you stay with your eyes wide open to have access to continued learning opportunities? Because just when you think stuff is really good, everything changes, and even your strategy has to pivot of the kind of programs you're doing, the kind of startups you may be focused on, the level of funding that may be needed. So everybody in this ecosystem, it's constant pivoting, whether you're the startup or the ecosystem creator or the service provider, right? Right. It's really fun to think about, but also very hard, not easy. Yeah.
The most interesting part is in the last 3 years, how we have seen a shift from all of us as grassroots entrepreneurs, come ecosystem builders, to prime ministers of every country knocking our doors and walking into our conferences and talking about Startup Thailand, Startup India, Startup Estonia, right? So,
but I think that's really important, because you actually mentioned that your background had been in startup weekends. We actually did the first startup weekend on the East Coast when I was at UM. I know, that's how old I am. Why is that important? Because the shift that comes from some people becoming, you know, ecosystem developers doing Lean Startup Circle or startup weekends or whatever, a lot of those people do not want to be the nerds that we are, no offense, to be the policy people, to represent the government, to be involved in bringing corporates into being part of conversations. And so the fact that you guys have such incredible people here who are part of that transformation, not just the cool people who work with startups, but the people who can migrate between government relations and corporate and startups and do it authentically, that's really the challenge. And I think that Jen has helped all of us grow into those roles, because we're also working with the top people in every other country in the world. So I think that that's been really valuable for me.
Yeah. And one of the things we talk about in Gen UK is that it's like we're the alternative embassy network. And it's a great sort of kind of parallel that we are the alternative to the embassy.
That's a great way to put it. And always leading with authenticity, I have to say.
Absolutely.
So do you guys have any advice for Gen Thailand's fearless leader, Steve? Because having now gone through your own learnings, putting the structure together, putting the teams together, advising on policy, doing the incredible work both of you have done, I'd love for you to also, you know, from the Qatar perspective as well as UK, and obviously the crazy work you do, what does he need to be thinking about over the first 2 years of helping tell the story, not just to the incredible partners he has at the ministries and at the national government, but also all the incredible ecosystem players that you've been bringing together to make sure that this reaches every aspect of the Thai experience and opportunity? What advice do you have for him?
I'm going to go...
You can look at him while you tell him.
He knows this stuff, but it is about the team, I think. And I know you mentioned this earlier, but the importance of the team that you work with is going to be critical, particularly at this early stage. And I mean, Steve knows that we're here to give every support that we can give to that. And the great thing that Steve does is that he's built the personal relationship. And that's really going to support him through the years in the future. But here in Thailand, the team.
I think from my experience and whatever I've learned out of Gen, Gen really challenges the status quo. It brings in everyone at par, and it tries to. It's an inclusive network wherein no matter what background are you coming from, no matter how powerful you are, you need everyone, and you take everyone together. So it's that interdependence between different people, which really strengthens Gen in your country. And I think if you are able to do that, nothing like it, which means getting as many partners as possible, as many volunteers as possible, as many entrepreneurs as possible, as many government departments as possible, as many industrial chambers as possible. It's going to help everyone do something substantial and productive with their with whatever stuff they are doing.
And we're awesome because we're ending exactly on time. But we need to tell you all, and I'm speaking on all of your behalfs, we are super committed to making sure Gen Thailand is a huge success. And the team he already has with Pearl and Trevor and Adam, we couldn't be more excited about the incredible vision you have for the country and the incredible vision you have for Asia and Thailand at the center, and we're here for you. So thank you very much for having us, and good luck. Thank you.
They have 159 countries backing them.
Yeah, I messed this up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're happy that we're having a lot of you today, and thank you to Ms. Ellen Glau, Mr. Yatin Tucker, and the moderator, Dr. Suzanne Ahmed as well. วันนี้เราเดินทาง